And hello, everybody. You're very welcome to a new episode of Redefining Cybersecurity here on ITSP Magazine. It's been a whirlwind of a few weeks here. So you may have caught a few episodes more on our on location as we covered RSAC conference in San Francisco, and a lot of topics there. My episodes here on Redefining Cybersecurity have been a little slow to come together. But funny enough, this topic was front and center at the conference. In fact, Agentic AI and more so its role in security, and then also the impact on risk and privacy for organizations and society at large. So I'm thrilled to have this conversation. It was driven by uh, basically me attending Legal Week in New York a few weeks back, and a ton of people in the legal space saying they're opening up the coffers and letting lawyers and others in the firm write code and write agents and do stuff for the firm that typically engineers would do and others would do. And I think it's driven by a lot of desire to under pull information together in ways that wasn't possible before and automate things that might have been difficult to do. Um, with just a single engineering team. So we're going to get into some of this, and I was thrilled to meet Frida at the same conference. I didn't get to meet Maged there, but had a chance to chat with Maged. Thank you both for joining me for this conversation today.
Thank you very much for having us.
Thank you for inviting us.
Good stuff, and thanks for for sitting there as I rambled on. But so it's interesting. I often look at security with a wide lens, not necessarily in relation to any particular sector. But having attended Legal Week, this particular space struck me. So, and the two of you work deeply in the space as well, hence your presence there at that event. Before we get into the topic, maybe a few words from each of you about your role, and then we'll get into the topic. Frida.
Yeah, hi, my name is Frida. I work as a solution architect at NewCode AI, and my role is a very customer-facing one. I help law firms implement AI into their businesses and really implement that into their workflows. And so we work with law firms. We also work with the government sector, and I do courses and onboarding as well.
Perfect. Again.
Thanks. So I'm the CEO and founder of NewCode AI. I started my AI journey 8 years ago. I'm an AI engineer by training and by education, where I completed my PhD in artificial intelligence from the University of Oslo. And then I went on and I became an associate professor and then started NewCode. My focus really is designing AI agents and making sure that our end users get the best in technology while not compromising on security or quality or accuracy. And for today's matter, cost.
Exactly. Well, let's start with, I guess, what law firms and I certainly want to look at law firms, but also inside counsel within organizations that may have business processes that can benefit from tapping into AI and building agents that are purpose built for specific tasks. Let's look at both of those. What is let's stay there. What's the main goal? What are firms trying to do, and what are inside counsel teams trying to accomplish as they look to agents and agentic AI and maybe even just the broader AI? So who wants to take that?
Yeah, I can start with that and definitely hand it over. So the main sort of like when we started the generative AI journey into law firms, the main architectural design of interacting with large language models was sending a query to the large language model and then getting an answer directly. And when you interacted with the large language model, the information that this model had was frozen in time, which people would refer to the knowledge cutoff. So if you ask it about recent events, if you would ask it about recent changes in regulation and laws, it will either give you a completely inaccurate answer or it will tell you, I don't know. In both cases, the user would refer to this as hallucination. Now, whether that's the accurate term or not, we can have a whole new podcast on that.
Right.
But the idea is they're not getting the information that they know very well should be the reply to that query. And many methods came out of that. So we heard about RAG, which is a retrieval augmented generation. Then we heard like it went deeper into something called knowledge graphs and the likes. What agents do is they add a new flavor to the mix. And the idea is that when I ask the large language model a question, instead of it relying on its frozen information in time, it either has access to a plethora of tools where it can go into these tools, try to retrieve the latest information. That could be a curated knowledge base, that could be the internet, or could be trusted URL websites, and fetches this information to the large language models where it can then start acting on it and giving the reply to the user. So that basically opened up a whole new world of possibilities and a whole new world of use cases, whether that's completely new use cases that were not possible with large language models or existing use cases that have gotten 5 to 10x boost because the large language model is no longer frozen in time.
Yeah, and I want to comment on that as well. That I think that the large law firms and also the in-house teams, then, as you mentioned, they might have slightly different um, targets when it comes to developing AI agents. As the large law firms, of course, they have so much data, and they really want to make sure that they're utilizing that. So we hear a lot of requests for people wanting to really benefit from that and extract the value that is in all that experience and all those years of data. Whereas with the in-house team, they might have slightly different targets with that. Maybe they want to help with specific processes they have, such as, say, onboarding clients and automating that process, and really focusing on their targeted use cases. And then we also see a big variety in the different size of law firms as well, where the maybe smaller and more niche firms, they can really benefit a lot, it seems, from structuring such processes with the help of agents that are specific to what they do, what they specialize in. Because you have these niche expert firms that maybe they only specialize in 2 or 3 specific workflows. And so by putting in the effort to really develop agents for that kind of purpose, so much of your workflow is actually then able to be driven partly or quite to a large extent now by these agents. And so they really see a big return on value on that as well. So I think they will have slightly different approaches in how they choose to enable that technology within their firm.
And are they so when there's shiny new bells and whistles and technologies available, there's a couple different paths one can take, right? Which is it's very clear what's possible, and I want to apply that thing to an existing process or part of my business. And then the other is I have no idea what's possible. Let me now explore all the new capabilities and see if there's something new. And so I'll stop there because I have a different question as well. So I presume it's both paths people are taking, but what are you seeing as law firms and inside counsel kind of explore what's possible with agentic AI?
When it comes to the law firm side, what we're looking into is using AI agents to retrieve the best historical cases that has maybe made them win. Understand what was the dynamics of the use cases that helped them win that case, and basically use that for a similar current use case instead of starting all over. And in larger law firms where they have multiple offices across multiple locations, where perhaps maybe they cannot use the same partner or the same lawyer for a similar case the next time, they want to make sure that the knowledge is inherited to that new use case. And that is where technically you're building like the Google search engine for a law firm, only that it's not tagged, only it doesn't have metadata, only that it's stuff there with 20 versions at different times. And oh, by the way, the latest version is not the version that we use. It was 3 versions earlier, but we don't even know where can we find that information. So this is where AI agents can come in handy, not all the time, but can come in handy to help the larger law firms use existing information or older cases. And when it comes to in-house, it's more of like reducing the reliance on law firms. When do we really need to call the lawyer from that law firm so that we can reduce our bills and instead rely on a tool that can reduce our reliance on that? I mean, some in-house have multiple law firms. Usually, the bigger and the more critical, the more law firms that they have on the roll. Um, so in that case, they might be looking into, do we really need that, or can we create a specific agent to automate that aspect? I wouldn't look into 100% automation, but at least can we cut down the bill by 80% because we don't need someone to sit and do all these steps right there. So these are the two top use cases that comes out of my mind, but I have many more.
And maybe so maybe a picture from you, Frida, because you're looking at this thing from a big picture architecture. How does this fit into the organization? I'm just curious. I mean, again, touched on a few cases that touch different data sets.
Mm.
So there's internal, there's I'm sure public record, there's I don't know what are what are all the data sets that this stuff can tap into.
Yeah, well, of course, with the agents, there are a lot of options for that. So you can tap into the data sets and you can also then enable it to use tools to a greater extent. So for the data sets, a lot of law firms are exploring how to really get the most out of template libraries, for example, reference texts, and also the in-house materials, as Maged was mentioning, really the previous cases that they have a good experience with and getting that out. Yeah. Additionally, you could also say, for example, consider including calendars and including access to, for example, who in the firm has experience with a certain type of case or have gone through a similar contract before, for example. So there can also be these types of internal databases more on the HR side of things as well. So that may be some of the databases to use.
What so you mentioned calendars, and it just struck a thought for me. And I'm sure we can think of unlimited number of use cases, but I'm curious if how strategic firms are in terms of let's just look at case law where and I'm not versed in all this stuff, so you'll have to correct me where I misspeak, but they're putting together a case, they want to present a case, they have to file things. You mentioned the calendar. How strategic can a firm get using AI and LLMs and agents to I'm just thinking, is it better to put something on the calendar next week or wait 2 weeks? Or is there some other case that we want to wait for that's pending that will help determine our case, or we don't want to wait for that because the outcome of that one might impact our case? So it's very specific scenario there, but how strategic can firms get with this capability?
Yeah, I think that's a good use case, considering the workload of the firm, considering also who is available by having maybe access to an internal calendar and seeing which kind of expertise do we need for this particular case. Maybe the agent can then help structure your team for you, maybe even assign some tasks and consider who will we need for this exact work process. So I think that is a good capability of this technology. Yeah. Do you want to comment on that, Majid?
Yeah, I would say in terms of strategy, the agents do level the field for
Mm.
many smaller law firms to have a tactical advantage to catch up without necessarily having let's say three project support to each partner. So the part that I see it could help is a lot of reduction on the unbillable hours from that angle, but from a different angle to look into the automating these things. But if I focus on the strategical advantages, it will be going deeper into due diligence. That you will no longer just having like a surface due diligence process or redlining. You can already offer deep due diligence off the bat. You will be able to have more tailored and better drafting for each of the cases that comes to you, rather than, oh, here is a template. We have 20 templates. Let's start from one of these templates. You're more like, let's start with a unique combination of these templates against the customer requirement. So the idea of customizations will also, and personalization to that user or to the client that's arriving to the law firm will be a great strategic advantage. That's on one angle, but the big main thing that many law firms or many of the users of the system will have to consider is that the bar to actually create a personalized agentic workflow for your law firm is now a bit higher. When we started working with large language models, it was more of like, okay, we will do a prompt for the whole organization. This is a prompt for this group, this is a prompt for that group, and then there's like sort of like a mega prompt for everyone. And then when prompts has reached their limits, because of the knowledge that are frozen in the large language models, fine-tuning came into the picture. And last year was a lot of talk about small language models instead of large language models, where the idea of large language models can tap into multiple small language models in order to enrich its response. But to create your small language models, then you needed to collect data, you needed to train data. So it was quite expensive, and the cycles was quite long. So you would then need to trigger a 3 to 6 month project in order to create, let's say, a single small language model for that department. And the idea kind of just disappeared. It didn't like fade away slowly. It's like no one's talking about it anymore. And less than a year ago, this was like keynote in many large conferences around the world. Um, and the reason that happened is that agents has increased the iterations. You're able to build an agent in a day, and you're able to iterate fast against let's say, against a folder that you know what the correct answers are against to measure the accuracy of the agents. But in order to get to the agents, you need a very much a practice group that has a standardized process, that has a standardized way of doing things, letting the agent replicate this process to a great extent, and then applying it to your daily workflows. So it does reduce the bar of having small language models, but it increases the bar. It's now more than prompting. It's not like, guys, we're going to spend 1 hour teaching you how to prompt. You more will need like a selective group that's curious and has time to start building specific agentic flows. And then, I mean, if you want to talk about security and the security and the cybersecurity implications of these technologies, there's two ways you can go on with this. You can just go to a supplier or a vendor and sort of like rely on the agentic designs that they do. It's a black box, okay, I need five in M&A, I need one that's, client friendly, I need one that's this friendly, or I need one that's, more tailored to the Supreme Court in, Eastern New York District or something like that. And you can just be happy with that. But if you go a tad bit deeper and you want to start creating your own agentic workflows, simply what you're doing is you're giving a large language model the possibility to tap into a set of defined tools to achieve the goal that you ask it for. So I can give you a very simple example. I had an AI, I created an AI agent actually just a few hours before this call. And I
Of
gave
course
it
you did.
access. Yeah, and I gave it access to a terminal, and I said, you can do whatever you want on this terminal. You just need to achieve the goal, and that goal is basically, I wanted it to print a specific set of references in a certain format at the end of each line. The challenge with large language models is that it's probabilistic. So if you ask the same question many times, you never get the same answer, and that's by design. It's not a flaw. So what I was trying to do is I was trying to make it deterministic by making sure that when you give me a certain answer, I trigger another loop that ensures that everything is following that same format. And in order to do that, I gave it access to a terminal. And it spawned the terminal. And what it did is it actually went to this repository and it pulled a certain set of code that would allow it to do it in a very certain way. But what happened is that it installed it. It installed that certain repository across my whole system instead of that specific environment that I created it for. And I sort of like, I've been doing software for 8 years now, so I know that you should never do that. But I never instructed the LLM to not do that because to me that was obvious that it shouldn't do that. Why would you install it across the whole system when you're just doing it for this specific task? So it actually broke the whole terminal. And it's fun because this was in my little sandbox. But if you have these little gaps in cybersecurity, where let's say when you introduce this as like lawyers can start coding, they wouldn't, a non-coder would not necessarily know they have to create an environment So they might actually introduce breaking changes across the whole law firm. So experimentation has to be, as we say, we need to measure the blast radius of experimentation. When something goes wrong, which will happen, what does that mean, and what's the damage? So that kind of taps into the cybersecurity part. Is AI agents reduces the bar drastically for introducing devastating uh, um, devastating errors, which were not possible before, and not just with a single command, right? So we have to also take that into consideration that that's a technology that it's yes, it's very capable of executing great things, but on the opposite side, it cannot just be let out there without certain amount of training and certain amount of practice.
Yeah, that's very true. And also, as we mentioned, if you give it access to your databases and also to your calendars, we should also be careful of that and what it actually has access to do and what it might do with that data. So, yeah, limiting also the amount of tools it has and tailoring it to the specific purposes that you're trying to achieve rather than maybe unleashing it without any clear guidelines.
But I want to take a step back because you're talking about a bar. And one thing that's always on my mind as I look toward the future, not just with the AI and LLMs, but just in general with technology, that especially when we start tapping into a lot of publicly available data that everybody can use to use it for their business, I feel we set a common bar that everybody then follows. And only when you have your own unique capabilities, perhaps your own unique data sets, can you get in and fine tune and create something new that everybody else can't do. And so, my question is your view on that. Are we approaching a common denominator set of firms, right? And only those with a lot of money and a lot of history of data um, can actually survive, or or are we setting ourselves up for a longer term win where more firms will or smaller firms can come together and collect their own data? I guess your kind of view of the big picture. Are we heading towards something nice or something a little blah?
Yeah.
No, I think this is what we mentioned before that they might be the different size of law firms and the different specialties of law firms will have their different approaches to this kind of challenge. And I think that really automating one task to a great extent and doing that very well and specializing in your niche, I think that can really get a lot of benefits from this type of technology. So you might see that they are very competitive actually with these tools in those specific fields that they have chosen their areas of expertise because they have access now to these AI-based tools. So I think that that is actually going to be a competitive advantage for a lot of the smaller or boutique firms that have really found their niche. However, of course, the larger law firms will also be able to implement these strategies across the different departments. So, yeah, I wonder how we're going to see that shape out between the different larger law firms and how that is going to affect what they choose to prioritize as well. I think we haven't really seen the effect of this yet.
So a long game here is my guess. So the other thing I wanted to ask was, so people hear me talk. I used to be in engineering and quality assurance, and we would have really quote unquote well defined product requirements documents. This system is should look like this, can do these things, shouldn't do these things, and then the architect would get involved to design it, and the developers would build out a plan to build it, and we'd have use cases and scenarios to test it. um, Two questions here. When it's something really small, purpose built for one task, do we skip that process of formalizing what it should and shouldn't do? And then that's where I get concerned with cybersecurity as well. And then also, even though it's small, um, because it's large language model driven, and to your point, Majed, that it can, regardless of the prompt, even if it's the same prompt over and over and over, you get different results. The the results are different, so you can't expect one thing to result in exactly the one thing. So how do you test that? So those two questions, probably big ones, but your thoughts on both of those?
From I can say from a computer science part or from an engineering part, engineers are very used to if I do this, I shall get that all the time. If I do
Right.
1 plus 1 on this calculator in Norway and I fly to Japan and I execute the same command, I'm expected to get two because it's defined by the engineering rules there. And when large language models came in, as engineers, we were like, okay, how can we test this thing? Because we cannot say this is the expected output. What's a successful outcome in this case? And the best answer we could come up with right now is to use another large language model.
Right.
And we describe to that large language model if the answer is around these adjectives and adverbs, it looks like it actually got that answer. Because this technology is super new in the world of engineering, in terms of practical and industrial use, I wouldn't say there is a concrete way to test it as of now, beside using another large language model and sort of like checking from the human perspective how that works. Now, will this be the case next year? Highly likely not, because the technology is evolving quite fast. So that's sort of like my short answer when it comes to testing. But that doesn't mean we should shy away from using it, because at the end of the day, it's large language models. It uses natural languages. Sorry, it uses natural language, and we as humans are more or less capable of, let's say, picking up a sample and testing it against the sample and scaling it carefully with the big sort of error or the big warning sign. At ChatGPT, it can contain mistakes. Consider checking the output. But that doesn't mean we will not start, eating the fruits very soon from this technology, especially the generative AI part.
An important part of that testing and validating the processes as well is likely going to be the human in the loop concept, where we do ensure that the steps along the journey of the AI actually make sense, and that we have someone validating that answer and really looking into the data and seeing that indeed it retrieved that information that I asked for, it structured it in the way that I expected, and it has repeatedly worked with a number of different files, for example. And I think that is going to be an important part of implementation of these bespoke agentic workflows, certainly in the beginning and the testing phases when you roll this out, and maybe before you unleash this until a whole firm. Maybe you will have your specialized legal tech group or your AI in-house group that will validate that before releasing it as a final product.
So, are these new people? Are these new humans in the loop, or are they humans doing other things that now are validating the workflows and the process and the decisions that we're handing over to agents and the rest of the system that ultimately we'll blindly trust? Because I suspect we'll get to a point where we think it's okay and yeah, let's let it roll. Are these new humans or who is it doing this work?
Well, a lot of the large law firms they have established these AI legal tech groups or in-house groups that are focusing on the technology that I will roll out to the firm, and of course, generative AI is a big topic in these groups. So we do see that a lot of the large firms decide to go with this specialized role, and yeah, so in a way that is creating a new kind of role where you do have the expertise both from understanding the legal perspective but also from the technology side and knowing what options are out there and what the tools are suited for and what it might be not suited for at the current stage or ever. And so I think that is a very valuable perspective to bring to the firm. And yeah, that might be newer roles today.
And are these roles focused on being versed in AI and creating agents, or are they versed in legal processes and language and data? I guess what I'm trying to figure out is
Hmm.
what are they going to know? Yes, the LLM and the agent returns what I expect it to, but that doesn't matter because it still screws up the the workflow and the process because that's not what the process is
Yeah.
expecting.
Yeah, so it will not, these new roles will be agnostic. Because if we would look sort of like the journey since 2022 till today, That role initially was going to be called prompt engineering, and then the role last year was called small language model tuner, and this role this year now is called agentic engineer, and probably next year it will be called something else. So I think that role will simply be very much focused on addressing the existing pain points of the law firms. And based on this existing pain points of the law firms, what kind of tools can we go out there and pick up? Is it an agent? Is it a prompt? Is it maybe just a standard good old fashioned software engineering, with a web crawler? So I think the strategic law firms are not going to focus too much on prompting or agentic because, anyways, these are going to change with time as technologies improve, but rather come out and say, okay, here are our 10 pain points. This is our results when we use prompting. This was our results when we use agentic AI. Now, let's say technology Y, we want to compare against agents and prompts in terms of accuracy, speed, and cost. Because certainly AI agents can solve a lot of problems the prompts can't solve. But hey, if one chat query costs you $200 instead of half a dollar, do you really want to solve it with agentic AI? So it's also important to take into the prospect the triangle, latency, cost, and quality. And it will always be against these three. And the successful law firms will already have the benchmarks of the data. They will keep into mind the technologies that I've used, and then they will track these metrics. How much did it cost me? How accurate was it? And how fast did I get my answer? Because again, if you ask a query and you get an answer back in 2 weeks, but the court case is tomorrow, you've not done much if it cost you a dollar and it was 100% accurate. Well, so these are going to be the three parts, and very much companies will be focusing on pushing sort of like the framework to benchmark this at the moment
Okay.
in the coming months. Mm.
So I like those 3 points: the cost, the speed, and the accuracy. And two of them kind of cross over into the cybersecurity world, which has 3 letters: CIA, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So the speed is availability for me. The integrity is the accuracy. Cost is um, not the confidentiality piece. And so you touched on it in your use case, Majed. The I'll just say the leak of the jewels across the system instead of in its own little sandbox or its own little environment. So how are firms looking at risk from a cybersecurity perspective, specifically around the confidentiality of the data,
Mm.
which may be their own firm's data, but also the results of that, which might have a broader set of data coming together to produce a result that they wouldn't want a competitor to see, or they wouldn't want, yeah, some bad actor who might get access to who some of the witnesses are, right? That could then tamper with the witnesses. So there's a lot of fun stuff there. So how are firms looking at this from a risk management perspective?
Yeah, I think there's an additional factor there as well, which is actually whether you can trust the results, which is also a risk that the law firms
Right.
are currently focused a lot on. There have been some publicity about this, and a lot of lawyers seem to be wanting to just make sure that they can indeed trust the answers that they're getting from the model. And so I think that just providing the references to the text and really saying where the AI got that information and providing some level of explainability is something that will really help to alleviate that stress and maybe ensure that the lawyers feel able to trust it and that they can indeed trust the results that they get as well.
Yeah, I heard a few judges and a few lawyers having a conversation that they were saying that the context of the response was important. So it may have been accurate
Mm.
in its response with the data it had access to, but it missed the piece of context from another case that it didn't have access to, or some other data that it didn't have access to that really shaped the response or the results of how it should be used, which is super interesting.
Mm. Absolutely. And for most of the law firms, the first thing that we usually start with is the InfoSec team, which is the security Where is our data being processed? And more law firms and their security team are getting aware of the generative AI and the implications for that, because initially in a typical software architecture or a system architecture, there were three components, more or less. I mean, there is of course a lot of small moving parts, but you can group it to three main components, and that is compute. So where is my data getting processed? And then you had the storage. Where is my data being stored, like physically? And then the third part, it fell down also into databases. And databases were like, okay, so even though my files are physically stored here, where's the metadata to those files? Who has access to it, and who can check it? Let's say when you're debugging, when there's a debug session or when something's found. And most InfoSec team were kind of used to these three things, these three questions, database, storage, and compute. But when large language models came into the picture, they have introduced two new components that did not exist before. And one of the main components is obviously the large language model. So when you're computing, or when I'm sending a request to a server to compute, where is the large language model hosted? And in many cases, if you're using like a certain system, you're either sending it over to OpenAI, you're sending it to Azure, you're sending it to Gemini. And that was a new sort of like a new angle or a new property that they had to check on that aspect. And the fifth part was what we call is the vectorized databases. So there was a new form of databases, and that's called vectorized databases. And again, you needed to send your data somewhere for it to get to be vectorized in order for the large language model to be able to consume it. So there has been a lot of, let's say, a learning curve for the InfoSec team, because more or less for the past 20 years, it's been static compute storage database. But now you have the vector database, which is different, and then finally the large language model parts. So a lot of there has been a lot of upskilling, I would say, going on for the past 2 years when it comes to the use of generative AI in the legal sector. And this upskilling, as it goes back also to what you mentioned earlier in terms of the roles. Again, this is also going to be like with AI. So again, it could be it's large language models today. There's no guarantee it's going to be large language models next year. But the idea of that there is sort of like a probabilistic system generating answers or generating output based on input queries is going to be here for a while.
Yeah. And the thing that strikes me is in a traditional networked environment, you have systems and databases and perimeter components, and you might segment the network in certain ways, but and you do that based on the applications you're deploying, right? These things run on these systems, have access to these databases, do these things. You
Correct.
start introducing agents everywhere, either the ones you build yourself, stuff, things other the vendors you use are adding to their systems, uh, third parties that plug in, and now what was a contained system that used to operate in its own can tap out and connect to a data set or coordinate with another agent across the network, which completely changes the game and messes up by network isolation and access control and all this stuff. So how do infosec teams kind of view that part of things at the moment?
Not only that, but it can also switch off the firewall momentarily to
Right.
execute a certain, let's say, a certain code, and then switch it back on. So how do you do that? Is by simply not introducing autonomous agents whatsoever as of today. That like, if you really want to have zero risk, then you just basically not give it the capability, because the alternative is you're going to describe to it, if the user asks you to do this, please do not switch off the firewall. But what you have to do is literally physically make sure it has no way to disable your firewall, or even brute force its way there by maybe introducing a very like you have to introduce a specific fingerprint, for example, for in order for it to do that. So the infosec upskilling is going to increase, or there's going to be a huge new aspect when it comes to introducing AI agents and the capabilities. which ties back to a very good point you raised earlier about how do we test it and how do we evaluate this? And the answer is we cannot, for 100% certainty, say that, okay, it's not going to do this and this or that, because the very good definition of AI agents is that it's autonomous and will achieve the goal with whatever means it has access to.
It might also be worth to touch upon the fact that, yes, we're worried about external risks of this, of information leaking in or out of the system or the firm. But in fact, the law firm also has internal security considerations to take care of, because one department may not necessarily have access currently to another department's sources. It may be that two lawyers are conflicted out of actually knowing what the other is working on in detail. And so we also need to be careful about the information that is put in and where that might resurface even internally in the firm, which is another kind of aspect of that security measure as well to consider, specifically though in the law firm.
That's a brilliant point, Frida, because it will be, let's say that again, back to this idea of, the bar is getting higher and lower, the bar to retrieve information, let's say as an inside job, is now much, much lower. If your Gen AI instance is not isolated to that user, and your AI agent is not sort of like isolated to specific data set you give it, you can with, let's say, much less effort, ask it to figure out how to bypass that and fetch the information if it has access to a terminal in that aspect. So I think the external threats are there and they're always going to be there, but I think there is an increase in internal threats for, let's say, actors that perhaps are not so loyal to, let's say, get access to other information or more information or bulk download information that perhaps they were not supposed to.
It's a fascinating world we're moving into, and as we talk about the bar being set high or low, I don't feel it's being reset. I think it's just getting bigger. So the top end is getting higher and the bottom end is getting lower. But it's gonna be fun to watch where this goes. I want to close with a message for my audience, who are typically security leaders and
Mm.
security practitioners, but I want to specifically speak to uh, legal legal firms and inside counsel. Maybe a point from each of you, maybe a best practice as security teams and firms begin to tackle this space of agentic AI in their operations. I don't know, a word of advice or a good place to start, or don't make this mistake, or whatever comes to mind for you. Who wants to go first? Frida?
Sure. I would just reiterate this about making sure that you can validate what is actually happening in the system that you are creating. If you are venturing out to do agentic workflows, yeah, make sure that you understand what does the AI have access to, are you trying to achieve with it, and also are you able to achieve that successfully, and does that achieve that successfully on repeated runs as well, considering this potential for variety that we might have in the results.
Jed?
Yeah. Yeah, I would say do not release Agentic AI without running a proper readiness test on your internal knowledge base and file storage.
Very good. Short and sweet. I love it. Well, you're both amazing. I appreciate you taking the time to spend with me to discuss this topic. Hopefully, the broader cybersecurity group can gain some nuggets here, and clearly, we're speaking to legal teams and the legal sector as well, more specifically. So, I want to thank all of you for listening and watching. Frida, Maged, thanks so much again. Hopefully, I'll get to see you at some point in the near future at some conference somewhere. And until then, keep well. And everybody, thanks for watching and listening. Please do subscribe and share with your friends and enemies. And we'll catch you on the next one. Thank you.